President-elect Donald Trump has filled his two most senior economic posts. With me to discuss what that means for Washington is Demetri Sevastopulo, the FT's Washington bureau chief. Demetri, we heard through the campaign that Trump wanted to drain the swamp, really sort of attacking Wall Street, the banks in particular. Here we have now a Treasury Secretary nominee in Steve Mnuchin, former Goldman Sachs banker. We have in the new Commerce Secretary, Wilbur Ross, a billionaire investor, a veteran Wall Street. Square that circle for me. What Trump are we looking at? Is the one who's drained the swamp, or is this something else?
Well, it's true that Trump campaigned on an anti-establishment populist message, and he was going to drain the swamp. He was going to get corporate lobbyists out of town, change the way government works. But you need experienced people to run the government. So you either go to the private sector or you go to people who've worked in Washington before. Now, what Trump is clearly doing is going to people in the private sector. He's picked Wilbur Ross as an old friend of his from 30 years ago. Steve Mnuchin was his finance chairman during the campaign. So he's bringing in loyalists and insiders, people who are close to him, who he thinks can propel his policies, as opposed to people who've worked in Washington who know the city.
You spent a lot of time during the campaign in places like Ohio and Pennsylvania, in places where he hit sort of this groundswell of sort of outsider, anti-establishment sentiment. I mean, take a guess. How does this play in those parts of the country where they thought he was going in there to attack Wall Street?
I think that he picked people in Washington, it would go down very badly with his supporters, because Washington is a word for things not working. They know less about Wall Street. If he brings these guys in, if he implements policies that could create jobs and boost the economy, the people won't care. And so I think that's what he's trying to do here. Well,
let me turn to policy. That's a good segue here. I mean, he's proposed some things that are pretty radical. I mean, tax cuts, sweeping tax cuts, particularly corporate tax cuts, shaking up and renegotiated some of these trade deals. He's talked about widespread deregulation, particularly the financial sector, basically getting rid of all the post-crisis regulatory regime that was set up. I mean, these are guys, since they're close to them, that seem to be willing to implement those things. Is that the message he's sending?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, Wilbur Ross is a guy who's been buying distressed companies and trying to turn them around in the Rust Belt for years. He's clearly in tune with Trump's economic message. He doesn't like a lot of the trade deals. He says what Trump started saying later in the campaign, which is, trade is okay, but it's got to be fair trade. And so Wilbur Ross is very strong on that. Steve Mnuchin is very big on tax cuts. I mean, on television this morning, he said that they're going to try and implement the largest tax change since Ronald Reagan. But it's pretty clear we're going back 30 years here. This is not the tax cuts of George Bush. This is the economic program of Reagan on steroids.
Let me broaden this out. I mean, we've seen a process here that's been unusual, shall we say. We've also seen what seems to be infighting, perhaps, on some of these last remaining jobs, particularly Secretary of State. Trump has met with Mitt Romney. You hear many in the campaign who don't like the former 2012 Republican nominee because he attacked Trump on the campaign trail. Tell me a little bit about Trump as a manager here, what you've been watching when you've been in Washington and New York as to how he's behaved here.
Well, the Secretary of State job, which is the most, along with Treasury, probably the most important cabinet job there is, clearly Trump is divided. He doesn't know whether he wants one of his loyalists, which would be Rudy Giuliani, whether he wants a kind of a established figure like David Petraeus, the retired general, or whether he wants Mitt Romney, who Trump has basically said looks the part, kind of a John Kerry look-alike type figure. It's not clear what he wants. Now, his people are out in public and on Twitter saying he should listen to the people who voted for him, not go for Romney. Other people are saying, but Romney understands the government better. Trump is trying to satisfy a lot of different people here, but I suspect all the public infighting is basically part of a game, and Trump knows who he's going to pick. He had dinner with Romney again on Tuesday night. Romney came out and said really nice things about Trump, which to me sounds like the precursor for someone as part of a deal where Trump then says, yes, he crucified me during the campaign, but we've made up and he's going to be a great Secretary of State. One
last thing. Can you put together the nominees he's had so far and say anything about what the cabinet's looking like right now in terms of characters, insiders, outsiders? What can we draw from it just right now?
Well, we can say a few things. He's picked Steve Bannon, his White House top strategist, Goldman Sachs, as a Steve Mnuchin. He has picked Mike Flynn, a general, as National Security Advisor, and he's looking at other generals potentially for Secretary of State and for the Pentagon. But I think overall, the one thing you can say is that there's very little Washington experience in the people he's chosen, with the exception of Elaine Chao, who's going to be the Transportation Secretary. Everyone is kind of from the outside, so you have almost nobody with executive experience. So this is going to be a really interesting test of people who have never run the government in Washington. They're all rookies.